Thank you for joining us on Camp REinvent. If you've not been on one of these calls before, we mute everybody because there's a lot of people on the call. So if you do have a question, we have someone monitoring the question, and you can type them in on the little sidebar on the right. So once again, welcome to Camp REinvent. Today's session is about finding out what today's online consumers are looking for. If you were at the last session, you learned that we are in an amazing time of change, and we're trying to determine how we get the consumer's expectations at the same level as our innovation as an industry. I've been a student of the industry for the past 20 years, and I work very closely with Ash Munshi, who unfortunately could not make it here today, but he works with us on a lot of our technology ventures. And we've been studying this difference between the consumer's expectations and the innovation as an industry, and we believe that if we can help our clients bridge that gap between expectation and innovation, they will be leaders in their market. So last week we talked about what the brokerage of the future should look like. The first piece of it, of course, was the broker, him or herself, reinventing themselves as owners, as leaders, as managers. And the second part of what we call our emerging brokerage paradigm is having an engaging web presence. Well, the only way to have an engaging web presence is to understand what the online consumer is looking for. Consumers control the information in more and more industries. Everybody knows. Oh, Ash, you made it. Good. Welcome. Ash is here from Terabit. So, Ash, we're just talking about how consumers control information. And why don't you give your perspective on that? You've been in the technology field for a long time. And what's happened, and how has that related back to real estate in terms of consumers controlling the information?
Well, you know, I'm a guy who's bought real estate for many years now, and I'd like to think that I'm relatively young, but my kids would say I'm old. You know, we started off with those listing books, and I remember people putting down, you know, my real estate agents coming to me and saying, here, I've dog-eared these particular listings, you should take a look at these things, and then we go drive around and take a look at that, and it would never have any kind of data around, you know, what was the price before, what else is going on in the neighborhood. You're completely at the mercy of the real estate agent. Fast forward 15 years, and all of a sudden, you've got Zillow, which tells you how much the house is worth. They give you all kinds of information about, you know, what's around you, what the history of it has been, all kinds of stuff like that. And then you enter Trulia, which is trying to do an aggregation and initially trying to cut out the MLS and being able to give you all kinds of different things. So you can look at stuff without having to belong to an MLS, without effectively going through a real estate agent. So all of a sudden, the information became completely transparent. The problem with both of these two sites, of course, is that with Trulia, you get information. The consumer doesn't necessarily get the most up-to-date information. Stuff might have expired. Stuff might have changed in price. And you know, they're completely subject to whatever the broker or the agent is willing to provide to Trulia. So they don't get an accurate representation of what's actually on the MLS. Just like with Zillow, they have a nice calculator. It works really well if you've got, you know, basically pretty similar houses. But if you've got stuff that's all over the map, you're not going to get really good estimates of this stuff. So this is where I think there's an opportunity for the real estate agent and broker to be able to come in. I think of Trulia and Zillow as great lead generators for you guys. So the information's out there. Somebody gets the information. They make the phone call to you because they want to now be able to see whether there's a transaction going to happen, or they want to dig into more detail. And that's where you can come in and correct the sets of things that are wrong with both of these two sites, i.e. give them a much better valuation of what's going on in the marketplace, give them a much better understanding of what's really available in the market. And again, the thing that's interesting about this is that it's all now being consumer-driven, whereas before it was realtor-driven. Remember the example I gave earlier, which is when I called up, I got the information, the realtor was able to provide me. Now, you know, we search on the web any time of the day or night from anywhere in the world, and we expect that information to be available to us instantaneously. So no matter what happens, whether it's Trulia or Zillow that generate the lead for you, you have to have some presence that allows the consumer to satisfy at least the first level of their appetite automatically and on the web. The second part of it, which is really important, is once they've contacted you, you know, attention spans have gotten much smaller now. They've got the ability to go to 5 different guys to be able to look up the information. So number one, you've got to provide them the data. Number two, you have to be engaging. And number three, no matter what anybody tells you, people will still pick up the phone to try and call you. If you don't answer that phone call quickly enough, you're going to lose that customer.
So, I'm sorry, I was going to just ask you a quick question. Would it be fair to say that the reason Truly and Zillow have been successful the past few years is because they gave the consumer what they wanted before the realtors figured out what the consumer wanted?
Exactly. They did two things, right? Number one, they provided the information. Number two, they aggregated the information. They took this mystery of this MLS thing out of the way and said, you know what, we'll give you everything that's available. Now, they're lying, of course, but the consumer's got this perception that they've got everything that they want. The thing that needs to get corrected, the thing that you can add is the information about the neighborhood, the specific values that are going on around that neighborhood, the specific activity that's going around that neighborhood. This is actually your ability to shine both digitally and in person in terms of how well you know the market and what's really going on in that market. Because ultimately, people trust people to do the buying. I mean, we can look around as much as we want on the web, but the reality of it is that once I create a relationship with the agent, I'm going to wind up probably buying from that agent. But it's very important to understand that that relationship is not being created now by somebody walking off the street into the office. It's being created on the web. So you have to have a presence on the web that provides enough information for the consumer to feel like, you know, you're a good person to engage with, and then the rest of the situation can take place. The rest of the sale can effectively happen. Does that make sense?
Well, that makes perfect sense, Ash, and it brings me to my next question. Because of what you just said, how important is giving that consumer a really positive experience? You know, when you look about, buying something from Amazon or buying something, a plane ticket to Expedia, you're looking for a positive experience. And with a house which is worth, hundreds of thousands of dollars, I don't think, as an industry, are taking great care. So talk about the online experience and why that's so important.
Well, look, the first thing is if you information hide, you're going to lose the customer. That's very clear nowadays, right? That is absolutely clear. In terms of being able to provide good service, there are two elements of being able to provide good service. Provide them with accurate data when they want it. The second point is be responsive. That's really, really the most important thing. When you get the lead, immediately go and pick up the phone and respond to them. That's extraordinarily important, right? The information that you've got to provide, it's got to be accurate, it's got to be easy to understand, and it also has to provide them the ability to be able to get a feeling that you are the expert in a given area. However you decide to showcase that, whether you decide to showcase that through talking about community events, things that are going on around the area, or your particular sales that might have occurred in that area, how expert you are, how many people you know in that area, what organizations you belong to, all of that stuff is extremely important. That connects you initially. But most important thing where most of the leads get lost is the moment somebody registers a form and you respond to them 2 days later, they're gone. They're just not going to be waiting around. The response time should be under half an hour to respond back to them. Even if it's something that says, hey, you know what, I got your message, I'll get back to you first thing in the morning, or something else. So some connection is extraordinarily important. Otherwise, you will lose that client.
All this makes sense. And one of the things that we preach to our clients is not to be overly salesy online. Explain why that's important also, because, a lot of people are trying to say, hey, we're great, and, you want to do business with us because we've got the best agents. And the online consumer doesn't really care about. They care that you know more about the market than they do. So how does that translate online?
Well, if you look at most websites today, most real estate websites today, they talk about themselves. They talk about how great they are. They talk about how great their experience is and all that. The reality of it, what the consumer wants to know is how great your knowledge is, how deep your knowledge is. They don't want to know that, you've got 14 certified agents and all this other stuff. What they really want to know is, can you provide the kind of data that they're going to need in order for them to buy their next home? And it's very important to underline the word home. The home is more than just a particular house. It's the neighborhood, the shopping, the schools. Schools are extraordinarily important. The more you are knowledgeable about schools and school districts and what goes on in the scores and everything else, that, in my opinion, is probably one of the most searched after items on the websites that we've created for brokers all across the country. School information is extraordinarily important. Demographic information is extraordinarily important. Where hospitals and shopping and all that kind of stuff, convenience, is extraordinarily important. People want to live in places where it's similar to what they're accustomed to or their lifestyle and things of that sort. So having an understanding of their lifestyle and matching their lifestyle is extremely, extremely important, right? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to present them the view of the area in addition to the homes in that area. If you convince people that this is a good area, and this is what's happened to me personally, I've bought homes that I never thought I would buy because it was the right area. You know, people go in and say, I want to buy a 4-bedroom, 3-bath house. Well, in reality, what they want to do is they want to buy a nice house or a reasonable house in a given area. They want to buy the neighborhood first. And if it turns out it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, they'll talk about adding a bedroom later or adding a bathroom later on. But the more important aspect of it is the feeling of that entire neighborhood. That's the kind of thing that you want to be able to convey to them. And as much as you can convey that both digitally and in person, that makes a huge difference in terms of creating that relationship.
How about the agent? Because we have to also look at the agent as a consumer. If there's an agent across town that you want, they're going to be checking you out online before they pick up the phone to call you or take your call if you're trying to recruit them actively.
Absolutely. So I think that there are two components to getting an agent, right? One component is how good a job you do at being able to attract consumers and generate leads. The second component of that is what kind of tools will you be able to provide to the agent so they can interact much better with the consumer both online and offline. Right? Again, go back 10, 15 years, right? We talked about the thing that was really interesting was, you know, the type of brochures people printed, the glossiness of it, the way the material looked, all of that kind of stuff. That professionalism that was conveyed in print has to be conveyed and be automated in the back end of the system that you provide the agent. So if you're thinking about recruiting, you've got to have a killer website for the consumer, and at the same time, you have to have a killer application platform that allows that agent to be able to present the kind of information they need to do after the original lead has been generated. So whether they're doing it for farming purposes, or they're following up, or they're doing a drip marketing campaign, or they're sending out newsletters, or they're sending a report for a seller as to how often their house has been looked at online, all of that stuff has got to be accessible to the agent, and it's got to be then be able to be transformed from the agent to the consumer, back to the consumer. Because the thing that consumers love, especially if they're listing with you, is to understand what the activity is that's going on around their home. So not only about how many people have looked at their home, but what else is selling in the neighborhood, how active they are, because this is the way you can have a conversation of potentially lowering the price, or potentially, you know, having them do a little bit of landscaping or whatever it is that you need them to do. Information should drive that part of that process. If you don't have that information, people are going to be reluctant to do it. And you know what? The web is an unbelievably good way of collecting that information so you can have a very informed conversation with your seller.
Now tie that into the social media strategy, because a lot of people, you know, say they have a Facebook page or they have a LinkedIn profile, Twitter, or whatever, but they're not really utilizing it in an effective way to drive traffic to the site and to also engage the consumer on the social media side. So what does social media have to do with what the online consumer is looking for?
Well, you know, look, you know, in real estate, we all talk about sort of your sphere of influence and the set of people that you know, so that you can actually create your contact base. If you think about the old way of doing that, that was always a list of people, a set of a phone list or an email list. Well, you can now take that to the next step by making a Facebook profile and effectively making that Facebook profile accessible to your sphere of influence. And what you're going to wind up getting is you're going to wind up getting people who are very active with you, so they're probably in the process of trying to buy, or at least getting started in the process of buying or selling. Then there are going to be people you're just going to want to stay in touch with and be able to provide all kinds of information like newsletters and things of that sort. So whatever it is that you do from your website, post that information onto your Facebook page as well. It does two things. Number one, it creates people to look at it. People can say, I like it. People can reference it. People can do all kinds of things. It generates traffic back to your website. And the other thing that's interesting about this is that because it's Facebook, it's really, really easy for people to be able to say, hey, you know, check this out, check that out. If you've got listings, put the listings on Facebook. Don't necessarily necessarily put the entire information of the listing. What you want to do is provide enough of a teaser where somebody can click a link, go to your website, check it out in all its wonderful detail, and present it in the right way that you want it presented, so that way somebody can say, hey, you know what, let me send this over to my friends over here and be able to do that. Remember one thing, email was very one-to-one. The thing about Facebook is it's one-to-many. And the other thing about it's one-to-many is that it's one-to-many the way I want it to be. So let me explain that. With email, if I send it out to a group of people, all of a sudden everybody got it. Well, the way Facebook works is I post it, right? So it's available for lots of people to look at, and they look at it whenever they want to look at it. So that's the big difference between email and Facebook. By posting it up there, you're providing the information when they want it, as opposed to pushing it to them in their inbox. And then what winds up happening is you get 20 more emails, and all of a sudden it's gone from their inbox. So if you have it on your website, if you have it on your Facebook page rather, you have all the right sets of attributes around it in terms of price and a few other things, and a nice link, then people can recommend it. People can say they like it, they don't like it. You can get all kinds of interesting information. The other thing to do on your Facebook profile, of course, is talk about yourself a little bit, right? Make sure that you're not talking about it as I'm the best realtor in the world. Everybody's going to say the same thing. Talk about the things that make you an expert in a given area, so that when people are looking, they can say, hey, you know what, she really did a good job. So-and-so did a really good job. One of the wonderful things I like about LinkedIn is that you can ask people for recommendations. LinkedIn, to me, is a wonderful, wonderful mechanism, much more so than Facebook is. Facebook is sort of diluted in many ways. LinkedIn is very professional. So that's where, in my opinion, you ought to come across as being tremendously professional. And at the same time, that's where you can put people who might be references to you. So, in LinkedIn, you can ask people to recommend you and things of that sort. Ask that. Have people talk about you. Have people give positive reviews of you. That will create a very nice impression of you when somebody's actually looking in. The other thing to do is always tie LinkedIn and Facebook together. Put one link for one to the other and vice versa, so that you always have access to both sides. Don't just leave yourself only on one particular platform. Leverage both of them, because both of them can interact with one another. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes perfect sense, Ash. And we're going to bring you back in a few weeks to talk specifically about how you engage consumers online. But before we take some questions that have been coming through, I like to throw up the Google homepage to prove the point that when you go to Google, you're looking for one thing. Okay, I've got a question, I'm looking for some information. So there's not a bunch of unnecessary information on their homepage. It's just a bar to type your question. So from a real estate broker's perspective, what's the most important reason that a consumer goes online? The first thing they see of somebody's brand, it should be what?
Search. They're looking for homes. The fundamental thing they're looking for is homes. If you wind up having a huge paragraph or a page about you and pictures about you and all that kind of stuff, it's just not going to work, right? That's number one. Number two is they're looking for stuff that doesn't sit around for months and months and months. If it looks like it was written in the 1980s, it's going to be pretty bad, right? You need to be constantly update your content. Then there are two reasons for it. One is because consumers are going to keep coming back. The second is search engines, when they look at updated stuff, they index it more often. If it turns out that it's just not fresh, they're not going to index it, and you're not going to do well from an SEO perspective. Make the design simple. There should be 1 or 2 or 3 different calls to action, no more than that, right? Absolutely no more than that. Make the design simple, visually appealing. Don't add too many pictures, because if it takes too long for it to load, people are going to skip you instantaneously, right? Look at all the different sites out there. Compare it to Trulia, compare it to Zillow, compare it to all these other guys. They're not terribly heavy in terms of being able to do that. The experience has got to be that I got to get my answer in roughly 10 seconds or less. If I can't do that, you got a big problem, huge problem, right? And as much as you love the videos of your stuff and beautiful homes and things of that sort, remember one thing: if it takes a long time to download, you will lose that client instantaneously. The most important thing you can provide is search for homes. The second most important thing that people come to your website for is to find a particular agent. Make it easy for them to be able to do both of those two things. If both of those two things are difficult, you're not going to get that. The third thing that they're looking for is neighborhood information. Make that apparent. Make that apparent. And the last thing that I would say you probably want to add throughout is make it easy for them to find something on a map. So mapping has become de facto an important thing in all the real estate sites that you can have. Don't make it old static maps. Make it maps that they can zoom around in and do all kinds of interesting stuff with. If they're static, you're going to get the feeling of something that was built 10 years ago, right? You want it to be current and fresh. Make sense?
Okay. Yep. All right, well, we have about 5 minutes left, and there's several questions that the people have been typing in, and feel free, everybody, if you have more questions, to keep coming. The first question I have, Ash, revolves around the idea of branding. You know, you made a point a little while ago that the heavy brochure and the glossy paper was the old brand, and now, you know, your branding is online. So the question really kind of revolves around the agents. You know, agents, you know, want to have their own websites and their own look and feel, and so, you know, what does that do to the online branding when there's, you know, really two different looks on your website?
Well, so let's start with the broker branding, right? Let's start with branding in general. Branding in general should be relatively subtle and should not be overdone. So let me explain that. You should not use heavy colors. There shouldn't be a lot of special fonts. There shouldn't be a lot of photos and things of that sort, because all of these things, when you look at them on a screen that's not the best screen in the world, they're going to look like garbage. So a lot of people have, you know, colors that are these graduated colors. Well, look at it on a monitor that was 2 years old, and you're going to see lines all the way across it. You can't even read the text. So a lot of people will hire somebody, a design firm, that's going to show you what the design looks like and what the colors look like on the latest and greatest Mac. Well, that's not how it's going to look on the old PC that a lot of people are going to go look at. So be careful in terms of color choices, font choices, and things of that sort. My personal take on branding is it should be, number one, consistent, and number two, it should be subtle. So consistency means it has to have the same color scheme across everything. Consistency means that you have to use the same font style across everything. Subtlety means have a logo that is in the corner somewhere that makes it obvious it's you, or the color scheme that makes it obvious it's you. Don't kill people over the head with heavy, heavy, heavy graphics, because you're going to have a problem displaying it, and as I said, you're going to have a problem with people being able to show it online because it's going to take too long for it to download. So that's kind of the overarching thing about your branding. The second thing about branding is you want to be able to convey in branding sophistication and knowledge. And these are things that a good designer will be able to help you communicate. Those two things come both from the style that you choose of the web page, to the font that you choose, the colors that you choose, the way the layout is. All of these kind of things are these are all subtle cues that people pick up. The way the picture, the consistency in the page, the way the picture is always on the left, or the navigation is, all of those kinds of things, if you're consistent, your brand will come across extraordinarily well. The third thing about branding is have something on the website that explains what you're about. It is important to talk about what values drive you. People will read that. So there should be something in there that says, you know, here is what we value in ourselves. Here is what we value in the consumer experience that we create. Here is what we value in the agents that we have. And here is the kind of properties that we take pride in listing or representing. Those kinds of things, if they come across clearly, and I'm not talking about writing huge paragraphs, it should be one page that succinctly captures that value system. And that value system should be the value system that your agents live by as well. So it can't be just on paper and you don't reflect it in actual actions. So be careful about that, right? So those are the three big things from a branding perspective that you need to be able to convey. In terms of broker versus agent, you know, the moment you start, if you're working for a broker, you're working for a broker. If you lose their branding, you're going to lose a lot of power of what it is that the broker is spending money on to be able to help you generate more leads. If you are on your own and you want to create your own brand and all of that kind of stuff, then the question that legitimately needs to be asked is, why are you working for this broker? There has to be some value that the broker provides, and there has to be some value in the brand that that broker brings so that you can take advantage of that. So it's important that the agent and the broker branding actually be coupled. And it's important from two perspectives. One is you don't want to be feeling like you're suddenly an island, right? You just happen to be there. You happen to be working with this broker because you're getting the best split, and tomorrow you might go somewhere else. What you really want to say is that I embody the value system that my broker is providing. That's an important thing for you to be able to convey. From an online perspective, you want to be able to take advantage of the SEO expense that your broker is going to be doing on your behalf. If you wind up fighting with the broker for effectively airtime, what you're going to wind up doing is spending money against what the broker is already spending on being able to generate traffic. So make sure that those two things are absolutely aligned in terms of that. I've seen lots of agents spend lots of money on SEO, and what they're really doing is getting their name above what their broker is getting, and now the money, the portion of their split that's going to marketing for the broker is now being used against them. It makes no sense to do that. So it's important to do that, right? Consistency across the broker brand and your brand. At the same time, it's also important for you to be able to embody the set of values that you add on top of the thing, so the set of expertise that you add on top of what the broker represents. And that's something that you can convey also in the same ways that I talked about branding. Consistency, look and feel, all kinds of other things. You know, from an agent perspective, the most important thing that I want to know as a consumer is how much valuable knowledge you have. So instead of focusing on the color scheme and all that kind of stuff, focus on providing informational links. Information that only you can provide that the broker themselves cannot provide me. That's really, really important. That's how you brand yourself as an expert. That's my 2 cents.
Okay. That's great information. We have one last question, and that is, how do I use Google Analytics to measure if I am providing the consumer what they are looking for?
That's a very complex question. You know, the Google Analytics has many, many, many different tweaks. So let's talk about the broker and then the agent separately. From a broker perspective, you know, you want to know that how long people are staying on the site. But Google Analytics is not really going to tell you all of that. You should probably use a third-party tracking system that allows you to measure, you know, how often somebody's looking at a given page and things of that sort, right? It's not just enough to say I got so many page views, because modern web systems don't just rely on page views anymore. So it's really important to see how often people are looking at it, but probably the most important thing to look at is how often are people looking at property details, because that means that you gave them something that is important, that they want to look at that particular piece of property, and then they want to dig in. Because ultimately, that's all that's really going to count in terms of generating a lead out of it. Because you could have a lot of people coming through, you can look at bounce rates, you could look at all other kinds of things, but ultimately none of that stuff matters. The only thing that matters is, are people looking at properties, and if so, how many properties are they looking at on your site? That's the most important thing. My opinion is track that on a monthly basis to see that you're actually getting traction on all those things. The second thing to remember is that real estate is seasonal. It's not going to be just up and to the right. It's going to grow a little bit. It's going to come down a little bit. It's going to grow a little bit. It's going to come down a little bit based on seasonality. And then your SEO will essentially generate more traffic, which you can look at from Google Analytics. But that traffic, if that doesn't convert into views of actual homes, you spend that money for nothing. So remember that there has to be a correlation between the traffic that you generate and the views of people that get homes. The next thing to look at is, besides the views, is how many people fill out forms. How many people fill out forms that generate leads to you? Because ultimately, none of this stuff matters if you don't get any leads. So track the number of leads that you get, track the number of times people fill a form out, and you know, different people have different strategies about forms. What they do is they give, some people will give five free views of a home, and then after that you have to register to be able to do that. Some people force you to register up front. Some people don't have a registration until later on. You can decide which mechanism you want to use, but my personal experience has been that what you really want is you want people to have a few views free and then make them register, because the people who are going to register are not going to be the looky-loos. They're the people who are really actively interested, and now you can actually start e-marketing to them. You can do all kinds of other things to them. So leads and registrations are another huge thing that you have to look at to see whether your investment in the website SEO is actually paying off. Make sense?
Well, yes, makes great sense, and we really appreciate you being on. That's a lot of great information, and thank you for coming on. For those of you out in the audience, thanks for your participation, your questions. Our next Camp REinvent is going to be on February 3rd, talking about how to drive traffic to your site. We'll have Ash back on the 17th, talking about how we take all this information we just talked about and then engage the consumer on your website. On March 3rd, then we'll talk about how we profit from internet leads. You know, Ash mentioned it a little while ago that you can have the greatest site in the world, but if you don't get back to those consumers, then you just threw away a lot of money. So we'll talk about how you profit from internet leads. On the 17th of March, we'll talk about how you stay in touch after the sale, because that is also incredibly important. 90% of consumers would use the same agent again, but only 11% do. Well, why is that? That's because people aren't staying in touch with them after the close. And then finally, the last session for Camp REinvent will be March 31st, about what the agent of the future is looking like. So we thank you once again for coming to Camp REinvent, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks again. Thank you, Ash.
Thank you. Bye-bye.